From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Well, thank you for joining me today. Today, my guest is John Thompson, who is someone that I have known for years and years and years and years and years, and we won't say how many. Just a few. John is I'm gonna start the list. Okay, here are some of the many things John is.
We'll see if you get them all.
A Christian music historian, an author, an educator, a musician, a music supervisor, host of the True Tunes podcast, a dad, a husband, former pastor. Are you still pastoring?
Yeah, house church.
House church. He's in charge. Yeah. So. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. It's good to see you again. Good to be here.
Good to have you on.
Yeah.
So John is going to be highly featured in the new film that the Erwin brothers put out there. And that's not to be confused with the Kendrick brothers.
All these brothers.
Who I've been working with.
Right.
The Erwin brothers have a new movie going to be in theaters on October 1st called The Jesus Music.
Yeah.
And John, being the amazing Christian music historian that he is kind of like the star, next to Amy Grant, it's kind of like the star of the show.
I don't know about that. I think that the Amy Grant, Michael W. Smith, Kirk Franklin, Toby Mac, Michael Sweet from Stryper, like the artists and the story and music itself, that's the star of the film. But they did lean on people like John Still from CCM Magazine and myself to sort of fill in the narrative of it. And I was really honored. I think I spent over 2 days, 8 or 9 hours talking with them about stuff. And then they culled it down into one single film. But there is so much footage sitting, waiting to be used, hopefully, in future stuff. But yeah, it's a huge honor to help tell that story. I guess when you're a super fan, as long as I've been a fan, and you nerd out about this stuff long enough, you become a quote-unquote expert. So that's me, I guess.
Yes, well, you are. You're one of the few Christian music historians out there. And author, one of the books you wrote was Raised by Wolves, the story of Christian rock and roll.
Yeah.
So you even wrote a book about
20 years ago. I can't believe that came out. Yeah. And I'm actually currently working on an update to that book that I wanted to have come out this year, but now it'll probably be next year because it has been 20 years since that came out. But I found out that the guys, the Erwins, were working on this, and my book was part of their source on things for that, as well as this other film that I've been working on, Electric Jesus. The writer and director of that film also found me through Raised by Wolves. So this book I wrote 20 years ago that not that many people read, a few thousand people probably found it. It's not like it was that successful of a book in terms of sales. And there's a lot that I wasn't thrilled about. I was young and it was my first book and stuff, but it did seem to make its way to a few people. And, so it's fun that it's bearing fruit all these years later, warts and all.
Well, you have done so much, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to because your story is so amazing. You have stories about everybody. I mean, from Bono at U2, and I mean, you've taught Larry Norman. I mean, you've had interactions with so many people and been involved in so. Let's start early. You started like as a teenager. Mm-hmm. Did you start a record shop? What exactly?
Yeah.
It's true. It was called True Tunes.
Yeah.
And True Tunes has now been, gone in many different ways and done different things.
Right.
But let's start as a teenager, entrepreneurial record shop. Tell me about that.
Well, if you even rewind it a little bit farther, as a kid, I had a really difficult childhood. I had a biological father who was abusive, sociopathic, alcoholic. We had a really traumatic first 10 years of my life. And won't go into a lot of detail there, but music was a retreat place for me. I had these headphones. There's a picture of them in my book, Jesus, Bread and Chocolate, where somewhere around my 8th or 9th birthday, I got these radio headphones. Before Walkman were a thing, they had these big headphones that would stick out, several inches on each side, and they had radios built into the headphones, right? So the music was a retreat for me. It was an escape for me. It was something to drown out the actual noise of what was going on. Now, I'm not talking metaphorical. I'm talking scary things going on in the next room kind of noise, but also the spiritual questions. I was drawn to existential questions about the meaning of life at a very young age, and I found a lot of that happening in rock music and soul music and blues music. And I didn't have a friend group that was telling me, oh, you're a white kid in the country in central Illinois, you should be listening to fill in the blank. I just found stuff on the radio. So I loved Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles and Johnny Cash and Bob Dylan and Kansas and The Doors. And I just kind of found anything. But to me, music that was asking the deepest, hardest questions and was at least somehow suggesting that there was something going on, something worth tapping into, that was what resonated with me the most. But at the same time, my mom had become a Christian as part of the tail end of this Jesus movement that had happened. So she was hanging out with this group of very charismatic, very engaged Christians who were singing praise songs and listening to this kind of hippie Jesus music, and that was always playing in the house. People like Honey Tree and Love Song, and some of it I really resonated.
Early 70s right now.
Yeah, we're talking mid-70s, yeah.
Mid-70s.
Yeah, 75, 76. So I'm hearing that stuff as well, and some of it I really resonated with, and some of it it sounded a little too frou-frou-y or a little too pretty for me because the world I was experiencing was scary. And so, but when I heard Larry Norman, when I heard DeGarmo and Key, especially their second album, that was the first one I remember really owning. My grandma bought that for me on cassette when I was 9. Had a song called Living on the Edge of Dying. And music like that was gospel tinged, but also had its feet very firmly planted in the real world. That resonated with me and really was like a lifeline. Like, it wasn't propositional. It wasn't just saying, hey, here, we're going to use rock and roll to trick you into hearing about Jesus. It was very relational. It was very relevant. It was very real. And it was good music. Like, it sounded just as good and normal as everything else. So I resonated with that stuff, and I was desperate to find a lifeline. And I wanted to hear not just answers, not just Jesus is the answer. I wanted to hear questions that made me feel like I wasn't alone in this scary
kind of like the Psalms.
Yes, exactly. Right. Exactly.
Kind of like Scripture.
Exactly. Ecclesiastes. I needed both Ecclesiastes and I needed stories that reminded me that even the disciples that were walking with Jesus got it wrong more than they got it right. And
right.
so
and you read the Psalms, it's not all positive, all happy all the time. It's not.
It's mostly not.
When you read the Psalms,
exactly,
it's you look at Scripture.
Where are you, God?
Yeah.
Where are you? You know. And even when I'm saying where could I go to get away from you? I could go to the depths of hell, and there you are. But even if we take single verses out to just make us feel good, but we leave out the searching, we leave out the pain. And a lot of Christian, I realize now with the benefit of 51 years in this journey, that a lot of the Christian subculture that has emerged is kind of cherry-picked verses that sell well and songs that sell well that are kind of escapist, but they skipped the verses, the passages, the laments, the stuff that was about the pain and the darkness. I had so much experience with that darkness that as I grew up, I felt like, you know what? If this music is going to impact people like me, it's going to have to be framed differently, because this emerging Christian subculture that's so fixated on creating a Christian version of fill in the blank, a Christian version of Led Zeppelin or a Christian version of Joni Mitchell or a Christian version of Huey Lewis. All they're doing is trying to populate this Christian subculture with Christian alternatives to real music. That's not what I was ever interested in. So by the time I was a young teenager, I went to a festival called Cornerstone Festival up in Illinois, where I heard Kerry Livgren from Kansas play his first fully Christian show. I heard a band called the 77s from Sacramento do this new wave rock and roll stuff, and I heard Resurrection Band, who I'd already been listening to their records. And at 13, almost 14 years old, my mind and my heart were just blown wide open that this was not music designed to sound like something else. This was legitimate art from a Christian perspective, but it was asking the same questions I had been asking already, and it was pointing artistically at a possible answer without spoon-feeding me that answer. And I decided that summer, 1984, that whatever circus that was, I was running away with it. Like, this was my life's calling, was to build bridges between my generation and this way of thinking about the gospel. And then the more I did that, the more I found books, I found pastors and priests at my church that kind of coached me on how to listen for the good, the true, and the beautiful and everything around, and how to inspire other people to find that. And then I also started to notice that a lot of this Christian music was coming from a culture that was not really doing that. It was really designed to say, don't listen to the culture, don't look at films, don't look at paintings, instead trust us to do the discerning for you, and we'll just create Christian content for you. And then I was seeing that a lot of the Christians I knew were no longer discerning anything. They were just consuming Christian products. So True Tunes, I started it really as a concept when I was about 13 or 14, and then I went. True story. When I turned 16, right before I got my driver's license, I went to every Christian bookstore within about 8 or 10 miles of where we lived, and I offered them all the same deal. I said, "Hey, if you hire me, I will do anything you want. I'll clean your toilets. I'll vacuum the floors. I'll even sell Precious Moments figures," which I had a profound moral objection to, because to me they were terribly dishonest artistically. But I said, I'll do anything you want. My conditions are, you pay me minimum wage, and you let me manage your music department, because I have a vision. And I said, and if you let me do this, I guarantee whatever your music sales are now, I'll double them in 6 months. Now, where a 16-year-old kid gets away with this, I don't know.
You did that at 16.
I was just barely 16. Like I was about to turn 16.
You weren't even 16.
No, I was going to get my driver's license because I had to be able to drive to work, right?
Okay.
So this was right before I turned 16. And all of these stores knew me because I went there all the time looking for this hard to find. The good Christian music was the fringes. It wasn't the main stuff. You could get that anywhere, and it wasn't really that interesting. Occasionally it was. But they all knew me, and they all liked me. You know, I was a likable kid, you know, but and they all offered me a job as a lackey, you know, to go there and be the low man on the totem pole. But none of them would let me at that age manage their music department. And none of them wanted me to monkey around with how they were doing music, because Christian bookstores put their music in the back, and, you know, it was kind of an afterthought, and most of them didn't really put a lot of energy into the music, because their store was very carefully designed to cater to a certain demographic. And a bunch of rock and roll kids with long, crazy hair and leather pants and stuff like me, we weren't their audience. But one store in downtown Wheaton, it was actually owned by a Catholic guy, and he catered to all denominations. He heard my spiel, and he was impressed. And he said, you know, in fact, they already had one of the better music departments, because there was a kid that had been managing it who I met through the Cornerstone Festival. And he said, you know, I like this idea. He goes, how do you feel about, you know, Catholic stuff? I said, I don't know much about it. You got to tell me, you know, what I don't know, but I just want to serve people. And he said, okay, you're hired. And he took me under his wing, and he taught me about retail. He taught me about marketing. He taught me about distribution and all this stuff. And sure enough, inside of 6 months, I doubled their music sales. And then
at 16?
At 16. 6 months again, I doubled it again. And before I graduated high school, I wrote up a business plan, and I said, here's my plan. I want to open up an entire separate store that's just music and T-shirts, and it's just a regular rock and roll store called True Tunes. I don't want anybody to even know that there's a faith angle to this thing until they've come in and spent enough time relating to us that then they feel at home, and they start to realize we're the same. Like, we're not, this isn't separate. This isn't, you know, we're just like them. We're not apart from them. And he loved it. And he agreed to bankroll the whole thing. He put up significant dollars to get us a separate location, buy the inventory, do the marketing.
What, are you 18 now?
I was just graduating high school, almost 18. I was 17 when he agreed to do it. I was True Tunes opened up a month before I turned 19 in 1989, and true enough, by the time I was 21 or 22, we had a magazine that we printed. it was a mail order and magazine, and it went to something like 40-some countries around the world. We had a concert venue eventually in the upstairs of the store. I think you might have played there maybe back in the day, upstairs at True Tunes. I don't remember.
No.
But we had 400 or 500 shows that happened there. And it
Wow.
was everything from crazy heavy metal stuff to singer-songwriter stuff, huge bands that broke out and became big like Sixpence and POD, to hundreds of bands you'll never have heard of. But True Tunes really became the kind of bleeding edge of where the question was always, is this Christian music or is it just Christians making music? And we just lived in that tension. That tension was how we knew we were awake every day. Like, we did not want to ever be living to just entertain Christians or create a Christian alternative of something. We were there to just be part of the cultural conversation and build relationships with normal people. And it did really well until another company came along and bought it with the plans of franchising it and making the magazine even bigger. And then within 1 year of that, it was all gone. It was all burned to the ground and destroyed.
Well, as soon as you stopped managing it,
well, and there was
anyway,
other.
I just want to say, you're listening to the Rick Altizer Show on Bot Radio. My guest today is John Thompson. If you joined us halfway through, John is a Christian music educator. He's a Christian music historian. He is a musician. He's an author. He's a music superhero. But we're talking about, as an entrepreneurial teenager, starting an empire of in Chicago area, True Tunes, which was a store. It was a magazine, a mail order magazine. It was a venue for concerts, and
even had a little indie label for a minute.
Kind of had a record label for a minute. Is that the True Tunes I was on? No,
actually, that came out with the second iteration of people that bought it from me. It was called Etc. Records, the label that I started. And we just found artists that had figured out a way to make a record and just needed distribution, and we were just kind of figuring out stuff.
You had a record store. You put it in a record
Exactly,
store.
and we had a magazine that could distribute it because we had mail order, because I learned that from my first job at that religious.
So this is all done but before you're 20.
Yeah, all the framework
place.
was all in place, yeah. By the time we started the label, because I've been in a band ever since before I could drive to our first shows, and that's probably the other part of the story, is that same Cornerstone Festival, I start, writing songs, and I want to be an artist as well. And so my buddy Rob and I started a band, and we changed names several times, eventually landed on The Wayside. And we're opening for Christian artists in Chicago when they would come through, the rock artists, the 77s or Steve Taylor or people like that. But we also played in clubs, and we played at youth groups, and we played in bars, and we led worship at our little rock and roll church in downtown Aurora. So we just there was no walls. There was to us, all of the divisions about this is Christian music, this is secular music. We hated and ignored all of those rules. Like, that was never part of the deal. And so I did it as an artist and as a songwriter, but then I realized when my favorite artists were out there and they were struggling, I kind of said, I got a vision. I feel a calling for how to build some bridges for these artists to connect better with fans like me, because I knew I wasn't the only one out there that was going to love this stuff. And then I thought, well, I'll go over those bridges as an artist myself someday. And I have, and I continue to make music of my own, but it's always been a tiny sliver compared to what I've been able to do professionally. But yeah, True Tunes, to call it an empire is probably a stretch. It was if you were a fan of alternative faith-based music in the Chicago area, or even in the underground around the world, to that chunk of people, it was influential. But it kind of got to a certain level, and then what happened was, a lot of the reason that True Tunes became so successful was because the music we were celebrating was ignored by mainstream rock people, and it was actually disliked by Christian music people as well, because a lot of the growing CCM industry didn't really have a use for metal and alternative music and rap music and the more extreme forms of stuff. And we loved that stuff because that to us was real music. Well, by the time the 90s got rocking, in the mid-90s, and Christian music was exploding, Christian bookstores and youth groups and stuff kind of started to embrace the more extreme forms of music. And so True Tunes as an alternative kind of distribution vehicle for that was less necessary, because a lot of those stores started to sell that music. And so our business model started to falter a little bit. We were no longer the only place you could get that kind of music. And the internet then as that came in, the new owners were kind of banking on if we just launch a website, then that'll be the business model. But it wasn't quite ready. We weren't yet to the place where people were going to turn around and buy everything online, and so the timing was just off. But in a way, I retrospectively, I'm kind of glad. I've never been good at walking away from anything. I just lock in on what I'm doing and who I'm serving, who I'm working for, and I'm kind of laser focused on that. And so God every so often has to kind of say, okay, John, this chapter is done and it's time to move on to this. So I'm going to kill this thing because you will not let go. So True Tunes had to kind of die. And I ended up going to work for the Cornerstone Festival for a number of years and ended up becoming the main stage host. And it was kind of funny to go from being the kid in the crowd to being up on stage helping coordinate what was going on up there. And sponsors, working with all that stuff, and made a film about Cornerstone that people can go find on YouTube now if they want to watch the whole history of the Cornerstone Festival.
Really?
Yeah, it's called Cornerstone Festival 20 Years and Counting. Somebody put it up on YouTube, so you can go find it there. And then after the festival went away, or actually before the festival went away, we decided to move to Nashville, and I got recruited to join EMI and Capital Christian Music Group. And I spent almost a decade in music publishing, kind of learning the industry from the inside. And so you
kind of helped me get signed there.
I did do a little deal with you,
You
didn't
did.
I?
You kind of got me in as a writer there.
I worked really hard on that scripture memory project and pitching those songs around. And I did a lot of work on Black gospel music there as well. So I was their main Black gospel publishing expert and loved that season.
Yeah.
So I picked up another skill.
So, I mean, it's just amazing. So growing up from 14, you're going to all the Christian record stores. You're engaged in the music. You've got your own music store now. You know every artist. You know every artist that no one's ever heard of. You've heard all the records that 7 people. You knew about my records. 12 people bought my records. I have 12 fans, and you knew all about me, and my record with linoleum. But you knew it.
I helped make it linoleum.
You helped. You did.
You owe me a plaque.
You helped clean that linoleum. Right. So you've had all of this history into music, and it wasn't because it was just a job to you.
Oh, gosh, no.
You were into Christian music because it was a lifeline to you, coming from this painful, broken, father brokenness. Mm-hmm. So I just made a film on this whole fatherhood thing, mm-hmm. our need to connect with Father and Father God, and our search for that, and our lifelong journey into mm-hmm. finding Father God. But you're at this point. I can see why you write the book on Christian rock and roll. You're raised by wolves. You're being consulted when the Irwin brothers are doing the Jesus music, film, and you're the guy they're going to, and you've got all these people. You're doing all this music supervision and helping them understand what the good Christian music is and what the stuff they want to use and what they don't. So it's so interesting how God has used your heart and your passion and is using that to help other people communicate what they want as well, like with the Irwin brothers. They're using you, and you're all over that thing. And and as we've all seen, you're you're a great communicator, and so that's amazing. Do you look back now? In the few minutes we have left, do you look back now and can you kind of see how God is shaping even those things in your life?
Oh, yeah.
To bring you here.
One thing is that my mom met a guy who became my stepfather and then adopted me when I was 18. I signed my own adoption papers. So, and my stepdad, who's now my dad, Thompson, who I have his name, he was in rock bands in the 60s, so one of the things we connected over was rock and roll. And it's all about redemption to me. This whole thing is about taking, and that's what rock and roll is. It's about tension and release. It's about bent notes. And even Christian rock was started, honestly, by Sister Rosetta Tharpe, a black woman playing electric guitar in the church. And you want to talk about oppression and marginalization? To me, that's the legitimate story. And all I'm doing now is taking what started as a means of escape for me and a means of, trying to find some questions and answers. And I'm finding new ways for that to lead to healing and authenticity to ask new questions, because the questions don't go away.
Well, guess what? We're out of time.
What do you know?
Can we come back and do this again next week?
Let's do it.
We're going to. We're pre-recording, so we're going to push stop and we're going to record it again. And we're just going to do it right now, but you're going to hear it next week. John, thank you.
I'll wear a different shirt.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Absolutely.
You can get more information about John and True Tunes by going to truetunes.com. And also, you can get more information on the Jesus Music movie, going to be in theaters October 1, by going to thejesusmusic.movie. And the other film that John was a part of, electricjesusfilm.com.
That's right.
You can find out more. And come back with us next week. John, thanks for being with us.
See you then.
If there's a show you've missed, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and catch up. Or you can listen to my podcast in iTunes or wherever you hear your podcasts. Just search for The Rick Altizer Show. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.